This case file update for the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is brought to you by our friends at the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast.
Check out the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast, which started as a podcast in 2017. It's a syndicated radio show broadcasting to millions of people every week. Crime and or trauma stories from those that have been there. Hosted by a retired police sergeant. Find the Law Enforcement Today podcast on major podcast platforms or online at letradioshow.com. That's letradioshow.com.
Walking eastbound. Officers in need of assistance.
Shots fired. Officer down. I repeat, officer.
Hi, everyone. This is Scott from the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. Just want to give you a quick case file update, but first, I'm so happy and so proud to introduce to you our first national sponsor of the podcast. It's the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. It's hosted by our friend, retired Baltimore Police Sergeant John J. Wiley. Jay has been a huge behind-the-scenes supporter of this podcast and our mission since the beginning, and he's helped us along the way with tips, suggestions, and encouragement all the way since we started back in December of 2020. So please make sure to check out their website and subscribe to the Law Enforcement Today podcast. Check them out online too. Check them out on social media. Let them know how much you appreciate their support of our mission. It means a ton to me, and I'm sure he'll really appreciate hearing from you guys. Okay, so our next fallen officer story we're working on comes from the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office in Wichita, Kansas. Deputy Brian Etheridge was a young deputy. He was just in the beginning of his career. He was ambushed and murdered during a Priority 4 larceny call he was sent to right after lunch on a fall afternoon in 2009. At the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, they code their calls based on priority and officer safety. Well, a Priority 4 is basically the lowest priority call there is. It's often just an information collecting call, a past action complaint, one that in many cases and in many agencies is usually just done right over the phone. Unfortunately, that day, no one could have predicted what would happen when Brian arrived on scene. It was a day that would leave this community, this agency, and Brian's family with many, many more questions than answers. With the help of their sheriff's office, we've reviewed and researched all of the sheriff's office reports along with the radio and phone traffic from this incident. We have a number of officers and family members in the next few days we're going to be interviewing, and we've pulled several evidence photos along with photos from the funeral honoring Deputy Etheridge that you can see now on our website. It's at officerdownmemorialpodcast.com. There are several twists in this story right to the end, with the rest of the story talking about how his amazing wife, Sarah, continues to mentor and give back to the law enforcement family that Brian served, to the law enforcement family that supported her for over a decade. And in her own incredible way, she continues to serve in honor of Brian and to ensure his sacrifice is never forgotten in a way that many survivor families and survivor spouses really could never do. She's an incredible lady, and it's really an incredible story. In addition to Brian's story, we've got a ton of powerful fallen hero stories from all over the United States coming up. And we just want to thank you for your support, for subscribing to the podcast, for listening to these stories, for sharing these stories. It's a way that we can all do our part to help these survivor families make sure that the service and sacrifice of their fallen officer is never, ever forgotten. So make sure you check it out next Friday. It's the true story of Deputy Brian Etheridge from the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office in Wichita, Kansas. Coming next Friday, April 8th, on our website at officerdownmemorialpodcast.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening, everyone, and thank you for your support.